Welcome to The Long Run. This is a podcast for biotech adventurers. I'm your host, Luke Timmerman. Today's guest is Steve Graham. Chances are you don't know his name, but Graham is a major behind-the-scenes player in biotech. Graham is the co-chair of the life sciences practice at the law firm Fenwick & West and managing partner of the firm's Seattle office. He has been working with biotech boards, handling corporate law, securities offerings, and mergers and acquisitions all the way back to the industry's founding days in the early 1980s. Immunex, the company that created one of the world's best-selling drugs, Enbrel, was the client that compelled him to specialize. 6 years ago, Graham was appointed co-chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission's Advisory Committee on Small and Emerging Companies. He continues to hold that position. He's been on a bunch of best lawyers lists. In 2015, he was named one of the 19 most influential people in D.C. who can affect your small business by the Washington Post. Graham also happens to be black. Last spring, he wrote a revealing memoir chronicling his rise to the top of corporate law. It's called Invisible Ink: Navigating Racism in Corporate America. Now, I've known Graham for 15 years, going all the way back to when I profiled him for the Seattle Times. Looking back, I'm still proud of that article, but I realize, after reading his book, that I only knew the barest outlines of the challenges that he really faced. How did he make it? What advice does he have for younger people of color? And how can all of us create a more inclusive biotech industry? This is a hard conversation to have, and I realize this issue goes way beyond biotech to every part of our society. But it's an important conversation, and we need to have it. Real quick, before diving into this conversation, I want to thank the sponsors of The Long Run. Biotech Showcase, co-organized by EBD Group, is coming up January 8 to 10 in San Francisco. Listeners of this podcast can get a $200 discount when registering. Just type in Long Run, all one word, as the registration code when you get your ticket for Biotech Showcase. Now I want to thank the newest sponsor of the show, Presage Biosciences. This company has a system that enables intratumoral microdosing of experimental cancer drugs. It lets researchers evaluate several drugs at once against a single tumor and get a handle on specific pathological response. A number of well-known innovative pharma companies have tested it out, and the device is being used in a clinical trial right now. To learn more, go to presagebio.com. Lastly, I want to flick at the next episode of The Long Run with Daniel Levine and Dan Mayer. They are the co-authors of A Rare Breed: How People and Perseverance Built BioMarin into one of the world's most innovative companies. I reviewed this book in October on Timmerman Report. I believe it provides a revealing perspective on the rare disease drug development business, especially some of the subtler, underappreciated aspects of what makes companies succeed or fail. It's well written and unvarnished. Don't miss that episode. Now, join me and Steve Graham for The Long Run. So today, I want to talk about race. Racism in America, particularly corporate America, and how it affects the biotech industry. With me today is Steve Graham. Just to get started, Steve, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your career arc?
I guess the arc begins in a small town in East Texas. I ended up in the state of Iowa because that's where my parents were from, and eventually landed at Yale thanks to a very dear college advisor that I had. Once there, it was just it was a matter of trying to figure out where I wanted to live, and ended up in Seattle. I started out in the largest law firm in Seattle, as everybody else starts out as a first-year associate, and I really didn't know what to do from the standpoint of kind of strategizing with respect to my career, and it was always a choice of kind of broadly speaking, business or litigation. I always thought that I had the temperament to be a corporate counselor. People that knew me said, "You have presence, you can think on your feet, why don't you be a litigator?" Litigation is kind of kill or be killed, which and kind of kind of destructive, if you will, as opposed to sitting around a table with people and trying to be collaborative and come up with a win-win. So I eventually gravitated toward the business side of things, and then I was lucky enough to have been in the formation of Immunex Corporation. And as you know, Immunex was one of the first biotechnology companies ever. I mean, when I started practicing life sciences, biotech, those are things that did not exist. But that got me on my way to doing corporate and securities work for life sciences companies. Eventually made partner in my first law firm. In 2000, I left that law firm and opened up the Seattle office for a large Bay Area firm. 8 years later, I repeated that process, and so now here I am.
Yeah, so you got started in biotech really at the beginning, the early 80s, with Immunex.
Right.
You graduated Yale Law School mid-70s?
76.
Okay, so there were a few years there when you were doing, kind of the typical associate type corporate work, right, with a variety of clients. And I think those are some of the stories that you recollect here in your memoir. Some of them do appear there, yes. Well, I think, first of all, this is just a really powerful and important book for people to read. I think I recommend it to people in biotech. One of the things that I was really struck by was your choice of forward. So this was by Jim Sinegal, and he's the former CEO, now retired CEO of Costco Wholesale. Very successful business executive, and a famously down-to-earth, kind of candid guy, roll up his sleeves kind of guy, sort of like the guy you'd picture as like your kind-hearted uncle, right? And you asked him to read your manuscript before you published, and I want to read briefly from part of his reaction in the foreword, because I don't really want to give away too much of what you say in your book. I want to hear this from you. But here's Jim Sinegal, and he says, after about 5 or 6 chapters, my initial reaction was, wow, this guy is really sensitive and a bit of a whiner. Get a grip. But as I moved further into the narrative, my attitude changed completely. It was now, holy shit, how does a person put up with this? And his is a classic example of death by 1,000 cuts. How do people not just give up? How do they control their hurt and anger? And now I was asking the question, not just why me a second time, like he asked why you wanted him to read this. Why is he an expert? But he asked it a second time from a different viewpoint. And he says that it became clear to me that I am personally part of a problem that is one of the most, if not the most, complicated and concealed in our society. No, I really do not believe that I'm a racist, but why are so many transgressions going on? Why so many subtle and inadvertent slights? So, Steve, you chronicle in this book a number of slights. You call them microaggressions. Some of them are more than micro as you go on in the book. But a lot of these things I think you could file under the header of subtle cases of racism, at least in the terms that we used to think of racism, like Martin Luther King marching from Selma to Montgomery, or Jackie Robinson putting up with what he did. I mean, we don't see those kinds of manifestations of racism in our everyday world. And I think part of what's great about your book is that you shine a light on some of these subtler things that go on in your world, in corporate boardrooms. So what did you hope to convey here with this book?
I hope to convey just that. It's funny. I think any successful African American in this country, you learn to screen certain things out. It's just part of the air. You kind of get over it and you move on. You have to do that. You'd go crazy otherwise. And so, and I managed to meet with success. I think by any measure, regardless of race, I am a successful lawyer.
Now, but before you go, let's talk just about some of these slights, the things especially that occurred earlier in your career when you were junior.
You mean from the standpoint of the nature of the slights, or why they matter, or
well, just describe what happened for people who don't necessarily walk in these shoes and don't understand that these things exist.
Well, I think you have to understand the context first and foremost. It's hard. I think it's hard for anyone to talk about race. It's hard for me to talk about race. It's hard for me to write about race because you don't want to offend. Like it or not, even though I think people can be well served by being told in a candid way, you still don't like to offend, and you also don't want to appear ungrateful. All those different things. But the fact of the matter is that if you're African American in this country, every day, 24/7, you're swimming in a sewer. You go to bed and you're an African American. You get up and you're an African American, and all that means in this country, all it has meant, for the last 300 years, in its various iterations, and so that's the context, and so part of that context is always having to, in effect, look over your shoulder, always having to make sure that you don't make the white person sitting across the table from you uncomfortable. Always kind of understanding and appreciating that your work is going to be discounted. Before you open your mouth, a discount is applied to whatever it is you're about to offer. And you have to understand that that's your world. That's the world that we live in. So you can say, okay, I don't want to deal with this, and you can check out. All right, you can take a deep breath and go through each day and do the best you can, and eventually, overcome a lot.
But these things, they bothered you. They did.
Oh, sure, they bothered me a lot. They would bother anyone, and so.
Now, let's just give our listeners a couple of examples here. I can think of when you were a young lawyer and somebody would assume that you were the filing clerk.
Right.
When you were an associate.
Right.
There were instances when you were working late into the night, very hard on behalf of a client, and then the time came to close the deal, to fly to some other city, and a white associate who had nothing to do with the deal was sent there to meet with the client.
Correct.
Things that hold back career progress.
Right.
This bothered you.
That's right. And it's funny, but my attitude was more that it bothered me that people seemed not to recognize what is going on. And so therefore the African American is blamed for whatever does not happen. In my context, and some of the situations that you just mentioned, it's the white associate goes to New York, I don't, and so ultimately it's the cumulative effect of these kinds of things means that fast forward a number of years and the white associate has more experience. It's kind of funny to say, but in many ways that didn't bother me as much as the failure for people to acknowledge what was going on bothered me. Go ahead and pay me pay me 50 cents on the dollar, whatever it is, but don't try to tell me that you're doing it because I come up short. And that's the part, to be honest, that has always bothered me most, just the dishonesty. And as we know, some people are affirmatively dishonest, if you want to call it that way, and those are the people that are clearly, racist, are certainly extremely biased, The biggest issue I think are those who don't know themselves. This is all happening unconsciously.
Unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias, which I think is the biggest issue. So many of these well, it's like anything. You're not going to solve a problem if you don't own up to it. Oh, just pick your problem. And so the most important thing in terms of addressing these issues is to get people to understand that this bias does in fact exist. And it's not something that we can end overnight. It's something we're dealing with 300 years of momentum. Things have clearly changed. You can argue whether they've changed, really changed for the better or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that that our special brand of racism, that quite frankly is grounded in white supremacy, is part and parcel of this country. And until people are willing to openly accept that fact, we are not going to make substantial progress as far as these issues are concerned.
Do you think that there is a lot of complacency out there around this issue? And the reason I ask is because I think a lot of people feel there's been a lot of progress. A lot of white people would say, like I said at the beginning of the show, that, we're not living in the Bull Connor era. Jackie Robinson did his thing. Martin Luther King. Look how far we've come. But that ignores, and in some cases, I think deliberately turns a blind eye to some of the biases which you describe throughout your career, pretending that they don't exist.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the beginning of my book, one of the reasons why I wrote it is to counter the pretending. I'm at the end of my career. I don't know when I'm going to stop practicing, but it's clear that I'm not 30 and I'm not 40. So just do the math.
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 66.
Okay.
So it's now I maybe lose my train of thought. But in terms of
you don't have as much to lose as someone who is 30 years old and writing this book.
That's in effect, yes. And so if people want to kind of rebel against me because I wrote this book, that's okay. Well, one person asked me, he said, "Aren't you concerned about adverse reactions in the party people when they read this?" I said, why would I, as an African American, be concerned about white people being irritated because I write a book about race? I said, I think just simply by asking the question, you've kind of answered the question. But going back to about complacency, there is complacency.
We elected a black president
at any number of levels. Yeah, elected a black president. That's evidence. The fact that I'm a partner in a major corporate law firm, that's evidence.
You're successful. We're sitting here. Yeah, look around.
Yeah,
and the land of opportunity, Steve.
Exactly. But part of that is, and a very good friend of mine mentioned this to me the other day, is that a lot of my close friends who are white have kind of responded by saying what you'd expect them to say, and what I believe them, and that is that you were never an African American to us. You were just Steve, and I think that's true. But while they were busy just kind of saying I'm just like the next guy, they were failing to appreciate that sewer I was talking about that I was swimming through every day. And a very good friend of mine, mentioned it the other day in just those terms. is that, he said, I'm sorry that I didn't recognize the context. I'm sorry that I didn't appreciate the context. I'm sorry that all those years that I knew you, I really wasn't giving sufficient appreciation for what it was that it meant to be a black man in an environment that was literally all white. And so I think that complacency is driven by kind of a tendency that I think we all have, which is to screen out the stuff that we don't want to see. The world isn't like we want it to be, so we'll just edit. And I think that just happens too much. And when people just kind of have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off, if you will, and say, look, this is what we're looking at. I think, I'm an optimistic person, and I think that's one reason why I've managed to be successful, because people can I can get kicked and I can get back up. But I guess some days I lose that optimism, and I lose that optimism when I feel that we're making no progress. And you can't hold up Barack Obama, you can't hold up Steve Graham and say that. Maybe you can say that you made progress, but you can't say that you're okay. Look at our society as a cancer patient. Racism is a cancer that won't go away. And sometimes enough stuff happens where we believe that the cancer is in remission. And then we open up the patient and we find that it has spread in horrible ways. Patient's not dead, at least not yet. Still hope that the patient will eventually get cured. But we're not making progress.
Biotech Showcase is coming up January 8 to 10 in San Francisco's Union Square. This is a big confab. About 3,500 people are expected to attend. Listeners of this show are welcome to take a $200 discount off registration. Just type in Long Run, all one word, as the registration code when you're checking out. Thanks EVD Group for sponsoring the Long Run. And have you heard of Presage Biosciences? I wrote the first story about this company when it was getting started in 2009. Presage has a micro-injector device that enables intratumoral microdosing of experimental cancer drugs. It enables researchers to evaluate several drugs at once against a single tumor and get a feel for tumor heterogeneity. To learn more, go to presagebio.com. Let's talk about some of how these aggressions took a toll. You use that term that they take a toll. Mm-hmm. For people who, do not walk around in these shoes, what's that like when, you show up at a summer party for fellow lawyers at your firm and everybody's having a good time and somebody blurts out a racist joke in your presence and you hear it?
It's funny because I didn't keep a diary to write this book. There's many things that I remember, but more things I've forgotten. And for years, I've run across people and they say, remember that time we were at that one reception or this or that, somebody said this and you shut this guy down? And I have no recollection. Some days you just have had enough and you counter in no uncertain terms. And in fact, you usually do in one way or the other. But I guess the real issue is that it continues to take a toll. It's kind of the black tax. It just contributes to the isolation because ultimately the problem is being the only one. even if they're two or three. It's still, for all intents and purposes, you're the only one. It's like one thing that I mentioned in my book, because it's a theme that kind of goes through the book. First it happened when I was in grade school, and I was in this all-white school, and something happened, and this white kid just said, "Go to hell, nigger." That I was crushed by that. And I think the main reason I was crushed by that was because I was the only one. I think if there were 20 black kids out there, we probably just would have had a fight. But as it was, here was this club of people, here's this group of people, and they look at me and they say, you do not belong. And that is the biggest toll, I think, that has just kept recurring, throughout my career.
It's isolating.
It's isolating.
And it's scary at times. There are moments when, you fear for your personal safety.
An occasion that happened. There's one incident in particular where it was I caused a fear for my personal safety, since someone was actually threatening to shoot me. But for the most part, it's just you're just on an island, and there's something that you have to fight through every day. This feeling of not belonging, and I think that so many white people are kind of misguided when they say that, well, gee, African American, let's make him feel like he's one of the guys, so let's treat him like everybody else. And you can kind of carry that theme, throughout, and apply it to any number of contexts, where the whole point of this is that because you're an African American in this country, and because of that context, and because of what you have to deal with day in and day out, if anyone treats you like everybody else, then by definition, they're not addressing the issue, because you are not like everybody else. Those are difficult concepts. I think I mentioned a couple of times in my book things like, I was kind of going along with it, pretending too. Don't notice that I'm an African American so that I can be acceptable, which is just contributes to the problem. But the fact of the matter is that you are kind of left on an island, and that is no fun. And in many ways, I think, maybe not totally true, but I feel that it's true, that without my wife, who was my oftentimes sole support, I would not have made it.
It really helps, I think, for you to tell the anecdotes the way you do in a series throughout your career. But let's talk about biotech. You've been in this corner of corporate America for a long time. What kinds of things can people do in this business to address some of the unconscious biases, the implicit biases, to be part of the solution rather than just perpetuating the problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure if these issues are necessarily unique to biotech. I think what is unique with respect to biotech, well, maybe not unique, but certainly sets it apart from many industries, and that is that most of the people that you encounter, most of the people that I have encountered, at least on the scientific side, judge people on the merits. That's my feeling. And if that wasn't the case, then I wouldn't have had a career, because people would not have been hiring me. If crosses the line and you start talking about other people that might be involved in the perimeter, whether they be other lawyers or bankers or what have you, then maybe not so much. Maybe it's just it's more of an issue. But I think there has to be, as I said before, there has to be an awareness. Because let's face it, if a white man walks into a boardroom and sees 10 other white men sitting around the table, chances are that person does not see anything wrong. That's saying it's a bad person or anything else, but he just didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And until people start taking note and seeing it, then things aren't going to change. My sense is that people in biotech are going to be more receptive to addressing these kinds of issues once they become aware of them. There's so many things that are wrong. One of the things, so many things that they could be depressing. Maybe they are. Some days they are depressing. One of them is when you talk to people and you say, "This organization is not diverse. This group is not diverse. This board is not diverse. We got to do something about it." And then the response is, "Yes, but first and foremost, we're concerned about competence," which obviously answers the question. It just basically says, yes, but have you forgotten we are a racist society?
You couldn't find any women for your board or any people of color for your board?
Exactly.
They really had to be 10 out of 10 white males?
Well, because we had to find people that are competent. So when you hear things like that, it just makes it hard. It makes it hard. In the broader context, it's like when people in general say that our society has moved forward in so many ways, which of course it has, which is not the same thing as saying that racism has been eliminated. But then you come to like fully appreciate the extent of voter suppression, and it's just like, wow. Are we really still there? Is this really still, as a country, Mississippi in 1950, when your goal is to make sure that no more than 3% of the African American population makes it to the voting booth?
I'm from Wisconsin, and I see these stories about people of color in Milwaukee standing in line for hours to vote.
Yeah.
I don't stand in line for hours to vote.
Right.
It's easy.
Right. And that's just part of it, and it's all of these methods. But when you see that, when you come to appreciate that kind of activity and that kind of thinking, I guess it's the difference between seeing someone killed and thinking it's an accident, and being saddened and being able to live with that, but then finding out that it was actually premeditated murder. And that's kind of what we're dealing with right now with some of this activity. It's like it's not thoughtless, it's intentional. And how can people think that way? I mean, it's a rhetorical question, and it really is hard to get from my mind to get around, because I really don't understand how so many people can think that way.
It's really interesting to hear you answer these questions, because on one hand, it sounds like you attribute part of your success to coming up in biotech, in an industry at a time and place that was open to promoting people on merits.
Correct.
That helped you.
Correct. Certainly did.
But at the same time, here you are 35 years later, and you often will walk into corporate boardrooms where you're the only African American, there are no women. And you hear these kind of excuses made. So they're really, and there's often a denial around it. I can imagine people say, well, we have a diversity and inclusion program. We're working on it. We recognize that is an important goal for our organization, but yet the numbers are what they are. Mm-hmm. They remain.
Mm-hmm. They do, and that's again, you keep coming back to the inevitable, and that is that you reach the conclusion that at a minimum, unconscious bias exists. At the outside, there's a good dash of racism in there as well. But it's there is this denial. I think because I can't. One reason why I've always been an optimist is because I know that if I go outside right now and I walk down the sidewalk and I walk 3 blocks and I smile at every stranger I see, I know that 99% of those strangers will smile back. There is an occasion when someone says, "What the hell do you want?" But for the most part, I believe that's the world we live in. So people.
You believe in goodness.
I believe in goodness. I wouldn't be here if there was some goodness somewhere. But when you have these diversity and inclusion programs, so oftentimes people think because they don't appreciate the context and they're not standing in my shoes, they think that's all you need to do. We have a diversity program. This is something that we love. We love diversity. We don't intentionally exclude anyone. But then why are your numbers like they are? Well, because we can't find anybody. Which is the same thing you hear when you're trying to get women in corporate boards. The two things about women, and it kind of applies to minorities as well, I think, is that well, why don't you have any women on your board? Well, because we can't find any that are qualified. Well, what do you mean? I mean, there's a whole list of women. Well, to be qualified, you have to have served in a corporate board.
You have to start somewhere.
There you go. I'm done. I mean, you always end up with those right-sounding responses. There's right-sounding policy statements and the right-sounding reasons for why things don't change. But at the end of the day, it's sexism and racism.
Who are some of the intended audiences for this book? I can imagine, certainly, as I mentioned, the 60-year-old white male corporate board member, hopefully having a bit of a wake-up call, a bit like Senegal had. But I could also imagine, younger people of color coming up in law, coming up in science, trying to figure how to navigate this tricky minefield.
I've, as you might imagine, I've gotten a lot of feedback on the book. I'm sure that those that had a negative response didn't bother providing that feedback. So it's all been, as a result, it's all been positive. But there are some themes, and I would say that white or black or other, the predominant theme is thanks. What I hear more often than anything else is thank you for writing the book. When that applies to the intended audience of younger, the generations below me, and people coming along, that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I said, look, here's some things that you probably would like to say, but given the fact that this is your first year on the job, maybe you don't want to say it. So here it is. And I have had any number of people be very, very vocal about that, and it's like, whether it's having a feeling of support just reading the book, or whether it's, God, you were just inside my head, and I've always tried to give back from the standpoint of trying to mentor people who are looking for someone like me to kind of get advice from. But that's just kind of one at a time. And I thought if I wrote a book like this, I could reach more people. The other intended audience are business leaders. Want you to understand the way it really is. So if this is something you care about, you should know this. If it's something you don't care about, then we don't need to have a conversation. Just go on. But if you care about it, you should know about this. And then I think it's something that should be quite frankly attractive to school teachers, because these are lessons that the sooner you learn them, the better. And I think there are a number of things in the book that can be used to start a discussion about certain aspects of this very complex issue.
Ultimately, it's constructive. You're not a bomb thrower.
Mm-hmm.
You're not. This is not written in an angry tone. I think it's. You're very much a lawyer. You write with a lawyerly style, and it comes across as just the facts. Like this is not only this is what happened, but then there's that next level down of this is how it made me feel. This is how I tried to work the system, tried to raise awareness of the biases I was confronting. So there's, I think that's partly why it's effective. It's not just a laundry list of grievances, mm-hmm. But I think it's just very helpful for people to be able to walk in someone else's shoes and imagine what that's been like. I mean, that's sort of like the first step, raising awareness.
Yes.
Before you can even begin to think about, is there a problem here and what should we do to solve it? I don't think we're that far down the road yet.
No, we're not.
And I, when I was reading this book, it's particularly toward the end when you talk about that hair-raising incident where you feared for your safety. I thought of a recent experience of my own, which I wrote about very briefly after the election last fall. I don't know if you saw this, but I was my wife is African American and our daughter biracial. And we were driving home from Yellowstone National Park on some rural highways and in the Northwest. And I saw a number of Confederate flags along the road, higher than the American flag, larger than the American flag. Worried me a little bit. And, I do know some of the history of northern Idaho. We stopped for lunch at one spot in one of these small towns. It was very quiet, and I'm walking with my family. This very quiet residential street to the place we're going to have lunch, and a car pulls up to a four-way stop in this rural town, sits there for a solid minute with tinted windows. It had rolled up real slow, and it stopped there. And I could see the driver eyeballing us as we crossed the street. And like a chill went up my spine. I thought, oh my God, do I need to be worried about what this guy sees with people of color in his community? And then your imagination starts to kick in. Like, what if he goes down the street and calls his friends with their pickup trucks? I mean, do I need to get my family out of here? I'm just by myself. It was scary. I talked with some of my white friends about this episode, and I asked them, is this my imagination? And they said, oh, that sounds like somebody was trying to intimidate you. Mm-hmm. Well, it worked. Mm-hmm. I was scared. Now, this is not to say that I can relate in any way to, this is one small moment in my life of that stands out. It's seared into my memory. But I think it's helpful for people to be able to walk in someone else's shoes, even for just a brief moment.
Yeah, and your story reminds me of one of the things that I've forgotten, because again, you just kind of accept it as ether. But when my kids were small, I'm not even sure if I ever told my family this. But when my kids were small, I would not. I wouldn't want to be in a national park. I would not want to be outside of a city with my family. And when we stop at a picnic place, I remember, my kids are small. They're running around, they're playing, they're oblivious, they're happy, and I'm watching. Yeah, you can't live your life worrying about being forced to kind of live that way, if you will. And so you tend to forget. But yeah, there's much that we did not do kind of out in the Northwest wilderness because I didn't think it was safe for a biracial family.
Yeah. I think that, I'm sure that's not news to a lot of people in the African American community, but it may be to people who, are fortunate to not have to be, burdened by those kinds of concerns in most of their day-to-day interactions.
Right.
That's true in 2016, 2017, the world today.
Yeah, it's I've one of the things that I've mentioned any number of times is that racism hasn't gone away; it's changed. And one of the things that I may have mentioned to you earlier, it's kind of bears repeating that too oftentimes, even white people of goodwill just don't appreciate the context.
Are there other things that you think that our biotech community can be doing a better job of to deal with some of the historic inequities and the biases? I could rattle off a whole list of health disparities. This is an industry that's about improving health, right? And you look at cancer, death incidence rates, prevalence, death rates. It's a lot worse. A lot worse outcomes for African American people, for instance. Is there something more here that's within the capacity of the industry to make an impact on?
Well, one of the reasons why I wrote the book is because I finally, obviously it's something I've been working for any number of years, just kind of off and on. But then just the way our social and political climate had just become so nasty, I figured it was time to finish it and add my voice to the conversation. And I guess that's where I come out. Who am I? I'm just a lawyer in Seattle. But I do have a voice. Maybe it's not a big voice. Maybe it's not a voice that'll change the world. But it's a voice that'll reach more than one individual. And I think that's where companies and organizations need to start. I don't have to right every wrong, but I understand that bias exists. This is the way it manifests itself, and so that we, as a policy, are going to counter that, and we're going to start trying to find not just diversity efforts, but effective diversity efforts. And I think that to the extent that companies do that, and I think it's the right thing to do. I also think that particularly in the healthcare space, as you say, all people are not created equal. And just from the standpoint of disease history and genetics and then that sort of thing. So you should have just for that reason alone. You should make sure that it's a diverse group sitting at your table. But I think also that companies like biotechnology companies probably have a greater opportunity to excite younger people and create programs to kind of get younger people interested, so that there's less of an excuse. I think it still is an excuse, less of an excuse that we're not diverse because there is no pipeline, and that obviously involves teaming up with schools and whatever. So it's kind of the education aspect. But we can all do our part. We can all do our part. It's like when you look at my book and think of some of the things that happened to me. What I want you to think about is that if it's happening to me today, Tuesday, how many millions of times is it happening today, Tuesday, around this country? How many millions of times? It's millions. So now you add the week, the month, the year, the decades. What are we talking about? Numbers that get well beyond your imagination. And the flip side of that is everyone can kind of do their part. And there's a multiplier there as well. And so can't worry about, you can't, that's just true. And I don't know if it's, I hate to sound trite or anything, but you can't change the whole world, but you can change part of it.
Well, this is an important point I think you made after Charlottesville. So I invited you. I wanted to know what you thought about that troubling event that shook so many people with the white supremacy that was on display there, and I think that forced a lot of people to confront what they had been, what had been part of the election cycle. But was hard for so many people to really come to terms with, that there was this sentiment that we thought we had buried, that we thought we had moved on, but it's still out there and alive. And I thought, I really appreciated your remark in that guest editorial in which you said that the racism doesn't anger you, it saddened you when you saw that. And that the way to carry on is to basically be good to each other in our day-to-day interactions. These are the things that we have control over. That's how we counter what you see there.
Right. That and I think a very important point is that small things matter. Even if those are small good things or small bad things. And too oftentimes, people are willing to kind of let stuff go. Your white colleague says to another white colleague something that is would be racially, that would be off-putting to a minority if they were a part of the conversation.
Well, the president says these things all the time. He calls the NFL players sons of bitches when they kneel for the anthem.
Exactly. But my point is that don't expect things to change if you don't have the courage in that conversation to tell your colleague he's out of line. And that's not, then that's, that sort of sentiment is something that you don't tolerate.
Yeah. So even when it's these dust-ups like the NFL anthem protest. No, I mean, these guys have the right to express their First Amendment views, just like everyone else. They're not disrespecting the flag. They're not unpatriotic. They want social change. And this is the only way that they were able to get people to pay attention.
Well, there's clearly, at least in my mind, there's clearly an element of race associated with this whole kneeling thing. And well, I'm satisfied with my own point of view. I don't need to convince anybody else of it. But, all these black football players are seen as just a little bit out of line. It's the old uppity thing. And this is the way you work. On my farm, this is what you do. I'm the boss, and don't forget that. And so it's twisted to say, well, they're disrespecting the flag. They're disrespecting the military, which we all know has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's just like going back to voter suppression. We have to get it. We have to rid the country of all this fraud. Well, that sounds good until you peel it back and realize there isn't any. So what are you really doing? We know what we're really doing.
It's voter
suppression.
Look here, don't look there.
Right.
These players must be disrespecting the flag, disrespecting the military. Let's not pay attention to the actual issue of police brutality and unequal education and all these things that the mass incarceration. Let's not face up to any of that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Steve Graham, I thank you for shining a light on the subtler aspects of racism in corporate America. It's an excellent book. I encourage everyone to go onto Amazon and order a copy. Thanks for being with me on The Long Run, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Long Run, a production of Timberman Report. Pedro Rosado of Headstepper Media was the producer and editor. Music comes from D.A. Wallach. Thanks to EVD Group and Presage Biosciences for sponsoring The Long Run. On the next episode, listen to my conversation with Daniel Levine and Dan Mayer. They are the co-authors of A Rare Breed, How People and Perseverance Built BioMarin into one of the world's most innovative companies. I reviewed this book in October on Timberman Report, and I believe it provides a revealing perspective on the rare disease drug development business and some of the subtler aspects of what makes biotech companies succeed or fail. It's well written and unvarnished. I recommend listening to the show and picking up the book on Amazon. Don't miss this upcoming episode of The Long Run.